Well, welcome to Eastern North Carolina in the autumn, in the middle of pecan season. So how do I know it's pecan season? We don't have a pecan tree on our tree, which they grow all over the place because our neighbor has a couple. And we see a squadron of squirrels that get the nuts in the morning, go across, eat them on our deck, and then I guess bury a few in the next yard over. So this is what a pecan looks like before. Somebody left it behind. This is what it looks like after. And they've gotten so habituated to this sort of freeway of pick up your pecans, stop by and eat at the gold camps, that I think they'll be asking for coffee soon. Anyway, what I want to tell you about the 3 phases of uric acid and how it really matters that you understand this, because most of us that listen to this particular video are thinking that uric acid is kind of an esoteric sort of lab. What the heck? I mean, if I was to ask anybody around here, they go, what? Who, what? And so I know that you know more about that, but it's really important to see, how did uric acid change through evolution? And obviously we can't go back millions of years and say uric acid with this was a certain way, but I can give you the context, and that will really help you understand in checking in on your own uric acid level, understanding your own uric acid level, and questioning what things to change. So there's always a project, eh? One thing after another. So the first thing I want to tell you about is we went last week from we went to Paleolithic time, and now we're going to shoot into what they call a Neolithic time. These are just terms, I understand, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring you to 10,000 years ago. 10,000 years ago is what is called the agricultural revolution. And it happened in a place called the Fertile Crescent. Pretty interesting. Called it the Middle East. It's Iran, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel, and of course, Egypt. That was the Fertile Crescent. That's where what we claim, and we now have all the DNA to back it up and the archaeological finds to back it up, is that where it got started. That's where we went from hunter-gatherer to farming into domesticating various animals. It's absolutely fascinating. It happened in this rather intense area and spread out from there. You need to know that area because that's going to come up a couple times in this story. So it was about 10,000 years ago. We shifted from meat-based, if you will, meat, fish-based, and maybe some fruits, primarily berries, and that was it, to growing grains, and we have certain animals that are still there, of course, because they're here today. And the next phase is going to be when sugar showed up. Where the heck did sugar come from? Sugar came from Papua New Guinea. Irian Jaya, Papua New Guinea. If you know that part of the world, I'll point it out to it later. It came from there, and it took a number of thousand years to go to China, India. By the time it showed up to the Fertile Crescent, the Middle East, it was about 700 AD. And from there, I'll continue. But that's the thing you need to know. We had 3 phases. We had the Paleolithic last week. We now are the Fertile Crescent, where we have the grains, the development of all the grains and all these carbohydrates. Because what comes out of that? Alcohol. 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 Alcohol as a ritualistic thing to take. Alcohol as a kind of special after work sort of thing. And I'm not making it up. Absolutely. It was big time present. And then, so that's 10,000 to roughly 600 to 800 AD, going from the Middle East to Western Europe for the sugar to show up. So by the time of, let's say, Leonardo da Vinci, Columbus, Henry VIII, and they were all current with each other. They were all at the same time period, actually all lived at the same time. So 3 of those had gout. We're going to assume that that's elevated uric acid. And it's questionable. We think that Columbus did too, but he had a lot of other situational circumstances. So these are the phases. Moving into agriculture, domestication, and farming for the grains and the alcohol to the sugar. And then the last phase is, I'll hold that, coming to it in a bit. So we have 3 phases. Why are they so important and why are they so interesting to you and trying to understand your uric acid? Well, when you have a kind of a diet of just of meat, and let's say of organ meat as well, that's pretty straightforward. We got all the variables covered, right? Well, then we come into the agricultural revolution, the Neolithic age, and now we have all these grains, and alcohol is quickly discovered, not just from rotting fruit, but it's discovered from, you can ferment grains. Now they're getting pretty clever. Not only do they have wines and you have beer, but you now are getting into distilled alcohols. So that changes everything, because your biochemistry, your biology, your metabolism really wasn't geared towards alcohol. That was kind of not a good deal. And so suddenly we have so much alcohol that has to be dealt with. So we deal with that for about nearly 8,000 years, and along comes sugar. Sugar, sucrose, fructose, and glucose. Sugar. That blows it up completely. So 3 phases of uric acid getting progressively higher and higher. Initially it was a good thing, and initially it was a good thing because it made fruit, when you had too much fruit and too much glucose, it quickly got converted to fat. And fat was the seasonal thing, right? Fructose is in the late summer and fall. We don't have anything to eat in the winter, remember? So you have the omega-6 from the grains as they started coming in, and you had the fruit, the fructose, and the extra glucose. So we're getting fat in the fall. We're using that fat in the winter, and then in the spring we're out to hunt again. So the first phase was when it was just, we had grains. This is now, we're talking 10,000 years ago, going forward from the agricultural revolution. So now we're having grains, which is a higher glucose, available on a regular basis now. And we're having alcohol. Okay, having alcohol, well, that was interesting. So we had alcohol roughly for about, 8 or 9 or 10,000 years before sugar arrived. Sucrose, imagine that. 8,000 years, alcohol was there. It was getting very sophisticated. All sorts of wines, they were traded, there were luxury goods all over the place. And you had all sorts of beers, you had all sorts of distilled spirits. It was quite robust, perhaps equal to what it is right now. So then along comes the discovery, like everything else was, brought in that, well, there's this plant in Papua New Guinea, sugarcane. And so it gradually migrated, over 4,000 years, migrated from the East Indies, we now call them, right? That's part of Indonesia, all the way over finally to the Middle East, the Fertile Crescent, 700 to 800 years AD to get to the Mediterranean area and Eastern Europe. So now there's a whole thing of sugar, and sugar becomes this huge specialty. I mean, phenomenal specialty. It was Middle East, it was Muslim, and you had the Iberian Peninsula, which is Spain now. That was big Muslim, so the sugar just rushed right in on with the help of the Muslims, and they were clearly in charge of it. Then it became Italian in Venice, and then it became gradually more and more part of Europe. And it finally got to the UK, England specifically, around the year 1000. Boy, around the year 1000. But wait a minute, Henry VIII lived around 1500. Leonardo da Vinci lived around 1500. Columbus lived around 1500. Well, the first case of gout was back 5,000 years ago, 2,600 years ago BC, so about 5,000 years ago. So gout started well before sugar was even available, well before sugar was even available. So it was alcohol and purines there. The story was simple, 2 variables. And then it went on to alcohol purines, meaning animal meats, the sardines, the herring, the dried fish, the organ meats, and alcohol, okay? And then it became all of that plus sugar, fructose if you will. But the next phase that's coming up is the phase of really the last 70 years. None of that I've told you explains why have the rates of gout, and we're using gout as a surrogate, as a marker, as a vector for elevated uric acid, right? Elevated uric acid. So the incidence of gouts have gone nuts in the last 70 years. That's the third phase. The third phase, as I've talked about in other videos, is the alcohol sugars. It is the C8, the linoleic acid, the plant oils that are being used, and it's a number of other things that I've already talked about. But let's take a look and get to it. Gotta say it, the weather here is stupendous today. This is we are the end of October, and each day is kind of precious, and eventually it gets like the rest of the world, the northern hemisphere, cloudy and cold, and you incubate for a while, right? You get fat like we did before, and you feed on it through winter. No, not at all. So the third phase is a phase in the last 70 years, and it's really become catastrophic, for no less than a word. You know, it's like, not only did we have everything they had before, we had the alcohol, then we had the layering of the sugar, which really torched the incidence of gout, and that's where we measure it historically. Those were reported. You know, it was the unwalkable disease of Hippocrates, as I mentioned. And so now we're at a place of, instead of getting healthier, we have the omega-6s, which clearly are, relative to uric acid, they are keeping the uric acid boxed in other words, it can't be excreted out with the urine and the stool. That's pretty bad. We have the antibiotics. We have the, I can't think of all the different things now. Those are the two that on top of it. They had the alcohol, sugars. That was stupendous. And so the reason I got into explaining any of this is not just looking for a topic, is because I had gout. You know, it was kind of vague. Was it gout? Was it pseudo-gout? And then it happened again. And I go, I really need to look into this. I am not going to be a person who's going to have this for the rest of my life. And I realized, whoa, look what happened with the alcohol sugars. Look at these other things. I wasn't doing much in the way of omega-6, but omega-6 is in my food. It's in the pork. It's in the egg yolks, unless I have a perfect pork or I have the omega-3 egg yolks. I don't have that. Those are not available to me yet, but I will make that change as we get to it. It's my reality. So I'm not trying to say I live the perfect world. I'm saying what I had to do to find out about how is this happening. So my story was not about fructose. My story is not about alcohol. I hope I have some alcohol. I love the dry farm wines. It's not about the omega-6. It hasn't been about antibiotics for, a decade anyway. So the story was harder to understand, but when it came to alcohol sugars, yes, I was using those. We were using xylitol in a number of the things that we've put together. I'm mostly a stevia guy, but the things, and I loved organ meats, and so when I backed off on the organ meats and I stopped with the xylitol, those are the big pieces on my chessboard. They might not be with you, so I'm not saying it's not organ meats. I'm not saying it's not dietary protein, purines. I'm saying more than likely, if you're a standard American diet, it's clearly the sugar, the sucrose, and the fructose story. So you will have a fructose story. If you're drinking a lot of alcohol, it's an alcohol story for sure. But for me, it really wasn't those things. So ongoing. Next time we're going to cover what deficiencies most of us have that also add to raising the uric acid levels that haven't been discussed, and then medications. Till next time. Hi, I just forgot to mention that, while you're listening to these different episodes, whether they're from a long time ago or something I'm doing currently each week, feel absolutely free to send me a question. Say, hey, while I was listening to you, this is what I thought. What are your takes on this? The reason I'm asking you to do that often opens up a whole avenue of thinking and thoughts, and even something I can explore for a future episode. So from a simple question to something more complicated, or explain your situation, I won't get back to you necessarily right away in a couple hours, but give it a couple days, maybe even a week or so. But I pretty much get back to everybody who has a legitimate question, and I give them a legitimate answer. And sometimes if I don't know or can't give them a very specific answer, I say I will look into it and I'll make an episode of this. So feel free to communicate. I hope you enjoy what we're going over. This is meant to be you and me on a walk together. Kind of, I'm talking to you, but you can talk back to me should you want to. Till next time, okay? Take care. Bye-bye.